We're going to look now at Kasparov versus Illescas in round 10 of the 1992 Linares tournament. Kasparov playing white kicked off with e4, and Illescas played the Sicilian defence with c5. And after knight f3, he now played e6. Kasparov played d4, so it's all standard stuff. And after capturing in the centre, knight takes d4, knight c6. Kasparov played knight c3, so he's not worried about anything like bishop b4, which is the pin variation, I believe. Instead, black actually played knight f6, which is another mainline move. And now Kasparov played knight takes c6. So this is a very interesting variation of Sicilian. And it seems quite counterintuitive the way that white plays the position now. After b takes c6, white plays e5. And you see that there's a sort of grip on d6 now with this pawn here. And you'll also see that this pawn is useful for gripping the f6 square later. Black played knight d5, and white now played knight e4, so that increases that grip on these dark squares. But at the moment, black has a dark squared bishop, so it's not that much of a big deal. And this is all mainline theory. Black now plays queen c7, which is again the mainline idea, to first provoke white into playing f4, which weakens this diagonal. So white plays f4 anyway, and now queen b6, so it's not queen b6 immediately. Now c4, so again all theory. But here I think the most popular move for black is bishop b4 check. Far less games have been played with what was played next, which is knight e3. Kasparov reacted extremely well for it, so maybe he had prepared for this game and this particular variation already. After queen d3, black played knight f5, so that knight's moving quite a few times in the opening. And Kasparov is not afraid to further weaken his king side. He plays the aggressive g4 now. One problem with g4 might be later black playing h5. But Kasparov has calculated it, perhaps, and still thinks white will be better. After knight d4, bishop g2, so the bishop is neutralising some of the weaknesses created by this vacuum. So as long as the white bishops can sort of cope with black's pressure on the vacuum, then there really isn't an exploitable vacuum of squares here. After h5, Kasparov simply played g5, so he's not concerned even about this f5 square being a nice square for the knight. Now here, bishop b7. So maybe, black's going to liberate the position later with c5, putting that bishop on a useful diagonal. Kasparov now played bishop e3, so with this move, he's offering a pawn sacrifice, because he must have expected black's next move, which was knight c2 check. Because if now queen takes c2, then queen e3. So after king f2, knight takes e3, black's winning a pawn now in this line. So queen takes b2 check. And Rybka thinks actually black's slightly better, but I think it is a very difficult position for black already. King g3, bishop a6, and black had to do something about rook ab1, skewering the queen and bishop. Now Kasparov plays rook ab1 anyway. After h4 check, he just tucks his king on h3. The king's quite safe. And white's got a lot of pressure now on the queen side, as well as maintaining this rather dominant central knight here. After queen c2, now Kasparov played rook hc1. And after queen a4, you'll notice that the black queen is running out of squares here. And this is a tactical factor which actually Kasparov underestimated coming up soon. He played queen c3, which is a great move, because after knight d6 this queen will be stretched on the diagonal. But the full tactical impact of it wasn't actually appreciated by Kasparov. After bishop a3, rook c2, and bishop e7, a very, very easy win was available here for white, believe it or not, based on this queen's location on a4. Kasparov could have simply played knight d6 check here. Let's have a quick look. Knight d6, bishop takes d6, e takes d6, and white simply threatens now to win black's queen with the idea of rook b3 and then rook a3, believe it or not. And there's no time for black to do anything about this. For example, castles and now just rook b3, and black is defenceless against rook a3 here. Kasparov was apparently gutted he didn't see this simple winning possibility. But instead, we are left with a beautiful game in another way. After rook b3, castles, Kasparov played knight f6 check, a dynamic piece sacrifice, just to get this lovely wedge pawn on f6, which proves lethal to black. After gf, bishop c5, white's still winning. He plays now bishop e4, which is a nice little move. Not only the rook can come to g2, but the bishop also supports an attack against black's king. And after rook fb8, king takes h4, allows the white queen to come now to g3 check. So black's really in dire trouble here in this line. After king f8, rook g2, there's numerous threats and it's very, very difficult to defend now. Queen takes c4 was played, and queen g3 is actually possible here. Kasparov actually played queen takes c4 though, but queen g3 would have been winning as well. After bishop takes c4, bishop h7, and all of a sudden this threat of rook g8 is lethal, and it forces resignation very shortly. After bishop f2, king h5, black is defenceless against rook g8. So let's also have a quick look earlier. After queen takes c4, if queen g3 had been played, say king e8, queen g8, bishop f8, here, this is also winning with the beautiful queen takes f8, king takes, and then rook bg3 would have been mating black. So that's another possibility. So it's all winning once this f6 pawn wedge was created. Let's have a quick look in overview and summary. A Sicilian defence, which could have been the pin variation, but instead black encouraged this knight takes c6 variation. So white's trying to strengthen control on these dark squares. Black's tempting this f4 move with this subtle queen c7 before playing queen b6. Now the rare bird's continuation here was played of knight e3, so bishop b4 check is more main line. I've actually witnessed Adams losing to Tozer in the Lloyds Bet Masters a few years ago in this line. It was quite an upset because Adams was far higher rated playing the white pieces against Richard. That was a very exciting game on the demo board. But anyway, after knight e3, queen d3, so Kasparov was really good here in this game at taking this grip on f6 to new levels, and later even sacrificing the knight on f6 to get this kind of lethal pawn wedge. I think he was carried away with this knight f6 sacrifice and missed this easier idea of just trapping black's queen with this simple idea of knight d6 here. But anyway, knight f6 was leading to a beautiful win in any case, because these rooks are just tearing down the g-file. Black's king is just a sitting target here. So after rook fb8, king takes h4, continuing the attack because it's now queen g3 is enabled, and we see this just crushing position here with bishop h7. So Kasparov made it look quite easy to make the black king using this pawn wedge, but it all started from the opening. The way the opening created these dark square weaknesses. So that was an exciting win by Kasparov in round 10. Thanks for listening, and please leave your comments on YouTube.